Hi, I'm Ed from Syvecs. So this week on Syvecs Says, we're talking about sequential gearboxes and how we achieve gear shifts using Syvecs. So a couple of things, first of all, with a sequential gearbox that we need to know. Fairly obvious, one of them, what position or what gear the sequential gearbox is in at any given time, a gear position switch, nothing more exciting than that. But one that isn't so obvious is a load cell on the gear lever which feeds information to the ECU. So essentially, how does it work? In order to have really fast gear shifts on a sequential gearbox, you'll be approaching your gear shift point, but the engine will still be under full load. So you might be nearing maximum RPM, nearing maximum boost. There's a lot going on. Obviously, pulling on the gear lever to try and achieve a shift is not going to happen. The teeth in the gearbox will be too tightly meshed together. The dogs won't release, and so you won't be able to do a gear shift cleanly. Some people would do this on older systems by pressing the clutch briefly, disengaging the drive, pulling the gear lever, back off the clutch, on the accelerator, and away they go. That's really slow. It's a bit quicker than a normal H-pattern gearbox, but it's nowhere near as fast as a kind of an assisted gear shift, or which we can achieve using Syvecs. So what happens? First of all, we need to, as I just mentioned, a load cell. What is a load cell? It's a small device, sort of so big in various shapes or forms, that goes on the gear lever. What it does is, the harder you pull on the gear lever, you get a proportional voltage to that that's sent to the ECU. So in other words, the ECU is aware that you're pulling on the gear lever and how hard you're pulling on the gear lever. This information then is fed to the ECU, and along with variables such as engine RPM, boost, throttle position, causes an action based on what you want to happen next. So for example, you're on a quarter-mile drag strip, foot's hard to the floor, you're in first gear, you're about to change to second. What actually happens? Pull on the gear lever via the load cell registers that you're loading up force on the gear lever and you want to change gear. The ECU then will go, okay, great. Does the force exceed the load threshold to initiate a gear change? And if it does, then this process happens. The position of the gear barrel is noted. So what is a gear barrel? Within a sequential gearbox, there's like a round drum in many cases. If ever you've been to some car shows, autosport sort of, you can have like exploded sequential gearboxes that shows how these all work. They're quite interesting. It might be worth searching this out. And that barrel rotates as the gears change. So you might have 4, 5, 6 gears on a sequential. So with the initial position known, the gear lever and the load cell is loaded up. The ECU will initiate a fuel and ignition cut, or a combination of both, depending how they're programmed. When these fuel cut, momentarily, it's very quick, all drive from the engine ceases just for a split second. You're already putting load on the gear lever, so the gear lever will then come back because the drive from the engine's been released. The barrel rotates. The ECU detects that the barrel has rotated and does a lead out where it blends or brings back in ignition and fueling. It's now in the next gear, it's ready to go. The whole gear sequence, which in an operation like this we call closed loop, because the ECU is waiting for the barrel to turn, and when the barrel has turned, the ECU responds to that and continues on without you having to do anything else. You don't have to put your foot on the clutch, you don't have to change your foot on the accelerator. Can happen in around 20 to 50 milliseconds. If you consider 1 second as 1,000 milliseconds, that's pretty fast. And this is why kind of a well set up sequential gearbox is such a crazy car, or it's a crazy thing to experience. So this is one of the strategies, and a closed loop system is probably the best way of controlling a sequential gearbox. There are of course other options which are sort of beyond the scope of this video, such as air shifters. The whole system is essentially the same, but rather than you pull in on the gear lever, you would have switches on the steering wheel. You press a switch, it forces an air actuator, that registers the load cell, and everything happens as I've just explained. As a kind of a quick overview as to how a sequential gear system and gear shift operation works on a Syvecs, you have a load cell, you place load on the load cell via the gear lever, the ECU detects that, and if everything else is right, if you've configured that the RPM is within the RPM window that you might want, if the boost or TPS or various other factors are all within your operating window, then great, the gear sequence will commence. Why is it useful to have things like a gear window, or RPM rather? You might not want to shift too early by accident. If you're pulling on the gear lever earlier than you intended to, if you're on a drag track or quarter mile and you're holding onto the gear lever, it's really easy to pull onto it accidentally, so you can filter out kind of the missed shifts. There are other options such as preventing you from pulling the gear lever and then too soon pulling it again, so that you don't get like a double shift attempt, and various other filters. So it's quite an exciting strategy to set up. They're good fun. And when you get them right, they're just totally savage, basically. The Syvecs does an absolutely awesome job of closed loop sequential gear shift. And it's pretty much as straightforward as that. If you've enjoyed this video, click like, subscribe to the channel as always, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them below.